Yeah, yeah. My pen stutters as I'm writing through these inner city parks, and the last thing on my mind is climbing local music charts. It's full of homeless alcoholics, M's and hopeless fiends, bumming yosers pushing shopping carts full of broken dreams. Reflections of Saigon painted through city avenues. I walk upon the streets where every step is full of gratitude. On this latitude it might seem a little crazy, but
Greetings, it's your host, Gabe Morales. Before I begin, I'd like to thank all of our viewers and subscribers. You give me the encouragement and motivation to go on with your thumbs up and positive feedback to help me improve these videos and suggest future topics to cover. Some videos I've produced are pretty specific, interviewing certain individuals who are subject matter experts, or videos that may cover gangs in detail, or sometimes I do just general overviews of umbrella groups. This video is just a basic primer on Southeast Asian gangs that I plan on breaking down more in future episodes. Again, I welcome and encourage your positive feedback, but if you're here just to slam me or my work, then don't even bother leaving a comment, as it'll quickly be deleted and you may be blocked. This only applies to a few. So moving on. I grew up in Seattle, which was one of the main hubs for Southeast Asian refugees after the Vietnam War in the mid-70s. I have seen many legal Southeast Asian businesses flourish and revigorate the local economy here, as well as in California, where I lived for many years, and in Hawaii, where I also lived. I have family and friends in Texas, where there is also a sizable Southeast Asian population, and have visited other parts of the country where many Southeast Asians lived. So I know that the vast majority are good and hardworking people. But I have also dealt with Southeast Asian gangs in many of these places and seen how, just like most other ethnic gangs, they mostly prey on their own people. They had trouble fitting in due to language, cultural, and economic barriers. Some people in groups like churches welcomed the boat people, Southeast Asian immigrants who found themselves lost in a foreign land. Again, it should be clear that the vast majority of these immigrants did eventually adjust and became successful and law-abiding Americans, but some never adjusted very well. Many of these individuals joined criminal organizations to survive, and we'll talk about that throughout the rest of this video as we cover Southeast Asian street gangs. As I described in the Pacific Islander video, Pacific Islander gangs sometimes form prison gangs, but the same do not usually hold true for Southeast Asian gangs. Unlike Mexican gangs who hope one day to graduate to the Mexican Mafia or Nuestra Familia, or skinheads and peckerwoods who hope one day to join an Aryan Brotherhood-like organization, or black gangs controlled by the Black Guerrilla family or other black prison gangs, most Asian gangsters had no interest in picking up another felony in prison and doing more time. They wanted to get out as soon as possible and make money. What they often do is try to skip the prison phase and graduate to organized crime. Another factor is numbers. There are very few Southeast Asians in prisons and jail, and they are often victimized. In fact, Asians as a whole are far less to be incarcerated as a percentage of their racial group compared to others. Some of this is culture, fear to prosecute them by the community, law enforcement that does not understand them very well, and some are based on other factors, such as a good education, the importance of which has been brought up several times in my videos and in my book. Speaking of my book, maybe now's a good time to bring it up. It covers a lot more on Southeast Asian gangs as well as Pacific Islander gangs, and is available on Amazon.com. It is not uncommon for Southeast Asian gangs to leave one gang or criminal group in one city and to join another group or gang in another city. They may also export their gang to another area. So, Southeast Asian gangs and gang members travel a lot, and that is how sometimes the feds get involved as they cross state lines. The new generation of Southeast Asian gangsters are also very tech savvy. They communicate on the dark web, internet websites, use new technology to their advantage, and continue to be a problem locally, nationally, and even internationally. One important issue for them is to save face, embarrassment from rivals, and not to embarrass their family. The Vietnamese Boys, also known as the V, are a very large gang out of Orange County, California. In the late 1980s, they also had a presence in Seattle, but are virtually unheard of now in the Pacific Northwest. In California, they sometimes align with Asian Boys Crips to fight other gangs. They are broken up into subgroups, such as Tiny V Boys. The Loud Boys started in Long Beach in the 1980s. 3 Loud Boys original gangsters, Stalker, Locust, and Trigger, were former Asian Boys Crips, and they allegedly started the Loud Boys with permission from the Asian Boys. The Loud Boys wore blue, as did Asian Boys Crips, but as the younger ones spread up into the Fresno area, they often banged red, as red was the predominant color up there. The Loud Boys have kind of died out on the West Coast, but they're still occasionally heard of. Oriental Lazy Boys is a gang that is active in the greater Los Angeles area in places such as LA's Chinatown. They're a predominantly Cambodian gang, active in Chinatown, near downtown LA, close to Alpine Park. It is ironic, Alpine was one of the first Mexican gangs in Los Angeles, but they are basically extinct, whereas Oriental Lazy Boys are not. They were one of the first gangs to be identified within the city of Los Angeles and are a blood set. Subsets of the gang included Sunset Side, Victor or Victoria's Heights Side, Chinatown Side, Locals, Lazy Outlaws, Bloody Outlaws, The Circle, and Young Lazies. So as you can see, they were fairly large. Many of them stated they formed gangs to protect themselves from other gangs, such as Chicano gangs, who harassed and conducted violence against them. Allegedly, the Oriental Lazy Boys became Bloods when their brother neighborhood Oriental Boys from South Central battled with the Pueblo Bishop Bloods that ended in alliance near the Pueblo del Rio housing project. They also had alliances with Pinoy Real, Tiny Rascal Gangsters, Corrupt Boys, Black Dragons, Asian Mafia Assassins, and Ninja Clan Assassins, so I've been told. Let me know if that is incorrect. On February 25th, 1996, Hang Sumnang Nor, best remembered for winning the Academy Award for his Best Supporting Actor role, debut performance in the film The Killing Fields, released in 1984, was shot dead outside his home in LA's Chinatown. 3 Oriental Lazy Boys were eventually arrested and convicted for his murder. Nor had a very rough life, as depicted in the movie based on his life story. He escaped the killing fields, but did not escape LA's rough streets. The original local boys out of the east side of Tacoma are referred to as 4-4 OLBs. They are one of the first documented Southeast Asian gangs in the United States. They claim Bloods also, but are not to be confused with the original local boys, 14 Gang, which is a Norteño gang based out of Wapato, Washington. They're also not the same as the OLBs I just described out of LA. Although, like I said, when they travel, some of these gangs have visited each other as they went along the I-5 corridor. The OLBs were formed on the east side of Tacoma near the area of 44th Street and Portland Avenue, which has a large Southeast Asian population. It is located near Tacoma's International District that centers along 38th Street. Soon the gang became big enough to start claiming subsets, and they often aligned with black gangs who were Bloods on the east side of Tacoma, who were dominant on that side of the I-5 freeway. The gang was well known for doing home invasion robberies. The West Side Oriental Fantasy Boys were a predominantly Southeast Asian blood gang located in the White Center area of Washington, which is just southwest of Seattle. The OFB started off in the mid-1980s as a hip-hop crew, so some of them were breakdancers, some of them were taggers, and some of them were rappers. The OFB were predominantly Southeast Asian, in particular Cambodians or Khmer, but also sometimes had other races. When they started having problems with surrounding Cert 13 gangs, they asked the Tacoma OLBs to supervise a mass jump-in. I forgot to note, there is a East Side OLBs, the original, a South Side OLBs, North Side OLBs. There is no West Side OLBs. It was Oriental Fantasy Boys who were basically considered the West Side faction, so they're often seen together at parties and sometimes committed criminal acts together. So these OFBs were blessed in. The OFBs had first generation, second generation, and third generation, who sometimes claim OFB when they're stopped by police. The West Side Local Asian Boys were a gang that came a few years later and aligned with OFBs, and sometimes even went by OFB second generation. So sometimes they'll use 2 names to throw police off, and sometimes I think they didn't even know. They just know they bang blood. While many of West Side Local Asian Boys lived in the White Center area, some also lived in the north end of Seattle, and they were called North Side Local Asian Boys. And they sometimes battled Hispanic gangs up there like United Latinos. Little Ruthless Boys were sometimes referred to as third generation OFBs, and I recall interviewing some of them. In fact, I interviewed Oriental Fantasy Boys, local Asian boys, and little ruthless boys. And that's how I know that they're not actually different generations, but different age group. And I often asked them the history of their gang. Sometimes they didn't know very much or just didn't want to tell me, but sometimes I think they were just confused. Again, I kind of get from Southeast Asian gangs sometimes that they're lost in our society and feel like they're living in another world. So as well as this stress, mental illness, and drug use, it is sometimes hard to interview them and get a straight answer. I did find it very common and did verify from SOR 13 gangs that they often battled Asian gangs, like the three I just mentioned, or Young Oriental Troop, or Asian Boys, who I'll cover here in just a minute, or Tiny Rascal Gangsters, and other gangs that will be covered here shortly. Again, even though they're predominantly Southeast Asian gangsters, they sometimes had other races, like blacks and whites, but very seldom Hispanics. Seattle Boys were founded in the late 1980s by some younger boat people who fled Vietnam and grew up in the projects and Section 8 housing located near downtown Seattle and Chinatown. They also found themselves caught between two cultures, the American culture and the Vietnamese culture. They were not accepted by the Americans, and they were not accepted by older Vietnamese who felt they were a blemish on their community. I remember in the 1980s, there was only a couple Vietnamese restaurants and businesses located in Chinatown in the Central District. But now, Little Saigon is very large. It is located near the cross streets of 12th and Jackson in the Central District, which used to be predominantly Black. Some of the older Seattle boys were killed or left the group or were imprisoned, and some had ties to the triads and organized crime figures in Washington State and up in Canada. The Tiny Rascal Gang was formed as a predominantly Cambodian gang in the Los Angeles and Long Beach areas of California to protect themselves from Crips as well as SOR 13 gangs. By October 1985, the TRG was on the offensive. The gang claimed turf along Anaheim Street near the heart of Long Beach. In fall of 1985, a carload of TRG members pulled up next to a car full of Eastside Longo gangsters. Insults were traded and gang hand signs were thrown. Then a TRG fired into the Eastside Longo car, killing a 16-year-old teen. Numerous payback shootings followed, and the area became a war zone. The TRGs had aligned themselves with Long Beach Insane Crips to fight against the Eastside Longos. By the early 1990s, the Mexican Mafia ordered Westside Longo to put aside his rivalry with Eastside Longos in order to support each other to fight against TRG and the Black gangs. We began to see a Mexican Mafia green light and hit list found in jails and prisons, with TRG featured near the top. Soon, all Southern Hispanic Sureño gangs were at war with the Tiny Rascal Gang. But instead of bowing down, TRG came back even stronger and grew in numbers as they gained a reputation of standing up to the feared prison gang. The TRG even produced their own training manual for gang members on how to fight. TRG often used 7126 in drawings, graffiti, and tattoos because when shown together, they resemble the letters TRG. One of the most well-known TRG gang members in the Seattle area was Vanna Big Lazy Foot, who later became an actor depicted in the movie Rascal Love. The TRG in Washington State have very close ties to the TRG in California, as their criminal records indicate. When they first started, TRG was independent of Crips and Bloods, and they often wore gray and black. They spread their name Rascals with a C. But as they beefed with Asian Boys, Crips, more and more in California, they started spelling it Rascal with a K, no more C. In Orange County, California, I'm told some TRGs started out as members of the Cheap Boys, which is a gang active there. In Orange County, there are many TRG sets. As I stated, TRG in Long Beach is very large. And in Orange County, they are also very active. There's a TRG mini street set, as well as a tiny family set located out of Garden Grove, California, not far from Disneyland. Orange County, California has many gangs, and I intend to do a segment on Orange County gangs in the near future. But it should be noted here that Little Saigon in the city of Westminster has the greatest concentration of Vietnamese in the United States, and many gangs operate there. Well, I think of it, if you're a former Southeast Asian gang member, consider coming on my channel and we could talk about why you joined a gang and how you got out. Young Oriental Troop is a predominantly Laotian Crip gang that started in the 1980s in Bakersfield, California. They were brought up to the Seattle area by OG Goofy Billabong, but they also had older advisors in the area. According to a longtime Kern County jail classification officer and gang expert, Tim King, Oriental Troop was short-lived in Bakersfield, but some of them did move on to Visalia, California, and they are still active in some parts of the San Joaquin Valley. Oriental Troop was strongest in Seattle, in the South End, also referred to as the Rainier Valley. Some of the first Oriental Troop identified were Bannock Yung, Kao Choi Rico Saifan, Fong Mai Sung, Andy Saturn, Thung Stinky Mekabong, David Assassin Saturn, and Lang York Duang Tabili. As the OT got older, the younger generation began to call themselves Young Oriental Troop, and then they even had Young Ghetto Troop. The YOT would sell guns, dope, and were very involved in robberies. In one case in 1997, a crew of Young Oriental Troop from Seattle was caught trafficking guns stolen from a Wenatchee gun shop. In this case, the owner of the store was murdered during the robbery. The three people who were caught distributing stolen weapons all around Seattle were all underage when arrested. A YOT member by the name of Vanna Rand escaped from the Regional Justice Center located in Kent, Washington in 1987. The details of which will be covered in a future episode on major Southeast Asian gang crimes. Bad Side Posse that I mentioned in the Pacific Islander video beef hard with 23rd Diablos, which was a predominantly Filipino Crip set. These two gangs were both around during the late 1980s and early 90s. I am told by people I interviewed that Bad Side Posse first started off as the Low family in the North End and extended up into Snohomish County. That was Northside Bad Side Posse. And a second faction operated in the south end of Seattle. That was Southside Bad Posse. Their official color was green. After the Ballard shooting incident that I mentioned in the Pacific Islander video, some of the Bad Side Posse ended up joining Young Oriental Troop, and some joined Tiny Rascal Gangsters. I have not heard of Bad Side Posse in many years now. The Asian Boys is a gang with roots in Long Beach, California. At first, they just tagged AB, but there is a prison gang called the Aryan Brotherhood, and when some started going to prison, they put a Z on the end to distinguish themselves. They will also sometimes write 1, 2, 26. This signifies the first, second, and 26 letters of the alphabet, or ABZ. The ABs are a predominantly Southeast Asian Crip set that started to protect themselves from the Eastside Longos, a Chicano gang. They will often refer to them as Eastside Chongos. According to some Long Beach OGs, the ABs split off from the Tiny Rascal Gangsters in the 1980s. Others say it was the TRG who split off from the ABs. Either way, the split turned into a violent beef that has lasted for several decades now. There was a brief truce in 1999, but it didn't last long. The ABs will diss the TRG as being roaches, and the TRGs refer to the Asian Boys as apples. Both gangs have rappers who will often refer to the other side in these street terms. Some Cambodians and other Southeast Asians moved out to the Valerio Gardens apartment complex in the San Fernando Valley, Van Nuys area. This apartment complex was claimed by a street gang called Valerio 13, and they began to victimize the Southeast Asian kids who banded together under Asian Boys. There were also some Filipino Asian boys, like the Mercado brothers, who will be featured in a future episode. They also were active in the San Gabriel Valley, just east of LA, and beefed hard with the Huaching gang. Exotic Family City Crips are not as well known as some other Southeast Asian gangs, but they're active in the city of Long Beach in the area of 12th Street. The Exotic Family City Crips, along with a small but violent gang called Suicidal Town and Asian Boys, make up the SEA Alliance. Asian Boys are very active in other parts of the United States and will fight Asian Bloods in places like Lowell, Massachusetts. In December 2006, 3 Asian Boys were involved in the murder of a teen in New York. In 2008, Asian Boys were involved in the murder of a 24-year-old man named Vuta Ah in Sonoma County, California, also known as the Gold Coast. Asian Boys soon extended out to other parts of the nation and are now active in at least 14 states in 24 different cities, if not more. The Asian Boys showed up in King County, Washington in the late 1980s and would bang on Oriental Fantasy Boys as well as other blood gangs. Today, there are Asian Boys located throughout King County and they're sometimes heard of in other areas. At one time, they were very active in the old Roxbury Village housing projects on the West Seattle White Center line before it was torn down. I had many friends who lived in Roxbury Village back in the day, and I hung out there often. In fact, I took this picture at Roxbury Park, located next to the projects in the mid-1990s. This baseball backstop was on the very same field where I hit a Little League Grand Slam approximately 20 years earlier while my father looked on proudly from the stands. So the place had a lot of sentimental value for me. You can see a roll call of local Asian boys, and they have crossed out their enemies, the OLBs and the TRGs. I also knew from this graffiti that there was at least one Roxbury Hood blood in the area who probably lived in the projects and decided he better get along with Asian Boys Crips since he was outnumbered. I come to this conclusion because when I first saw this graffiti, that tag was not there. When I came back later, it was there, and he did not cross out Asian Boys Crips. I've often said, graffiti is like the newspaper of the streets, if you know how to read it. The Men of Destruction is a Hmong Street gang that started around 1987 to 88 in Fresno, California. They were first known as Peace MOD when the new wave music and fashion fad was going strong. When MOD first started, they would wear blue, red, black, just about any color. Today, Menace of Destruction members tend to use the color red, but depending on where they're located, they may also be seen wearing blue, gray, or black, or a combination of these colors. They can be identified by gang-related tattoos, such as their gang initial and the numeric code 301. The 3 standing for M, sideways, the 0 for O, and the 1 standing up for D. At one time, they had a female arm called the Ladies of Destruction. I'm not sure if that is still the case. Let me know. While initially the gang was made up almost exclusively of Hmong or mountain people from Southeast Asia, today they have other races in their gang who hang out with them also. MOD is not the largest Asian gang in America, as some have stated, but I put them in the top 3 behind Asian Boys and Tiny Rascal Gangsters. They are said to be the oldest active Southeast Asian gang in California, especially in Fresno, where they often beef with Fresno Bulldogs. They have also been active in Stockton and Merced, and at one time were active in Sacramento, where I used to live, although I'm told that's no longer the case. Let me know if that is true. They have also been active in Minnesota, as well as Wisconsin, where they are subject to a RICO indictment, in Michigan, and can sometimes be found in parts of Colorado, Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Alabama, North Carolina, and even Alaska. The MOD have been well known for trafficking illegal drugs and weapons all over the U.S., as well as being involved in other crimes. Reckless Tigers is a gang that operates on the East Coast. The Tigers evolved from roots in Southern California and spread across the country to Northern Virginia. The gang advertised itself on social media, posting photos and videos of members driving expensive cars, partying in Las Vegas, shooting assault rifles, and showing off exotic snakes and other animals. They are often pictured in their own custom line of clothing covered with tigers. They also flaunted money and other things that might attract young, impressionable Southeast Asian kids. This is a typical recruitment tool for Southeast Asian gangs. In 2020, the city of Fresno, California was shocked when 10 people were shot, and some of them were killed during a backyard party. Although some of the community tried to deny it at first, the incident involved gangs. It caused the city to finally acknowledge that and recreate an Asian gang task force. Gang violence in the city has gone up and down over the years, and presently has about a half dozen active Southeast Asian gangs with as many as 300 members. Mongolian Boys Society is another predominantly Hmong gang that started in Fresno, and they are also active in Visalia, California. In 2020, a federal grand jury in Fresno returned an indictment against 3 members of the Mongolian Boys Society, charging them with conspiracy to commit murder for a gang shooting that killed 4 Hmong men. They have also sex trafficked girls in and out of the state and were mentioned in a 1998 case whereby 23 members and associates were charged with raping 3 young females and forcing them to work in prostitution. MBS will usually flag red and will also be included in a Southeast Asian gang crimes video to be released soon. As you can see, Southeast Asian gangs have been very active in the United States, especially in Southeast Asian communities where they often terrorize their own people. as many of these gangsters have aged out since the late 1970s to early 80s when they were just kids, then popped up on law enforcement radar screens in the 1990s all over the United States. Some of them became reformed, some became drug addicts, and today some operate more like organized crime. Police, corrections, and the Southeast community, as well as the community at large, should be aware of these groups so that we can implement better prevention measures, intervention programs like Safe Futures, run by my brother Sorry Spy in my old neighborhood, the High Point Projects area, as well as many other good programs. And for those who don't want to listen and still want to be hotheads, we have other programs for you in not so nice places, and we will put you on ice. Until next time, this is Gabe Morales signing off for Gangsters, Cops, and Politicians.
It's 9 GT.